There's one other thing I got to ask you about because is Breitbart.
Yeah.
Because I had my go around with Breitbart for quite a while. He got a little irritated with me because I think I had talked about his feelings of being rejected from Hollywood as the driving force in his life, and
Yeah, that's one of them. That's
he
for
didn't
sure.
he didn't want that to hear that from me
Yeah.
anymore.
Right.
But just talk to me a little bit about Breitbart because. One of the things that we see, with Ron Paul is I don't know if Ron Paul is racist. I tend to think
Right.
that he probably is to a certain extent, but
Yeah.
I think what's clear is he found racism. Let's put it this way, he didn't have a problem with racism enough so that he was willing to use it as a way of making money with his
Right.
newsletters, which is the
Right.
best thing that we can say about him at this point.
Right.
Give me your sense. Is Andrew Breitbart any different from that?
Well, gosh, I don't know. Technically, I guess I should know a lot about Andrew. We went to college together. He graduated a year after I did at Tulane. And I didn't know him then, however, and he wasn't politically active then. Of course, he says his political epiphany came during the Clarence Thomas hearings when he realized how horrible and venal we liberals and leftists were for giving this wonderful man, this brilliant legal mind, such a hard time. I find that a little bit hard to believe, and I think it sort of just comports with his attempt to sort of reinvent himself as this deep thinker, as opposed to what you can tell from his writings, which is that he is certainly not that. He's making a lot of money, and he's doing it by being provocative, and he's doing it by teaming up with people like James O'Keefe, who have absolutely no credibility among honest people, and doing it by pushing, false interpretations of Shirley Sherrod's speech. I mean, every single thing that he does sort of smacks of that attempt, like Drudge, who he learned, from at Drudge's feet, basically, how to do this kind of thing, how to be provocative and how to get lots of hits and lots of people talking about him. But I think in Andrew's case, it's certainly opportunistic. I will tell this story, and I'll leave it at this. And Andrew's threatened in the past to sue me, but he can't because it's true. When we were at Tulane, I know that he certainly wasn't too bothered by racism. Our senior year, actually my senior year, his junior year, there was a cross burning that took place on the lawn of his fraternity, the Delta Tau Delta House at Tulane, and Andrew didn't do it. I joked about that several months ago by just sarcastically saying that, given the evidence that Breitbart uses for other people, we should just accuse him of it and be done with it. I was obviously being sarcastic. He didn't do it, and it was actually a cross burned because his fraternity had offered a bid to a black student for the first time, and someone, probably an alum of that fraternity or something, didn't like it and burned a cross. And at the time, those of us who were anti-racism and civil rights activists on the campus, we called a press conference. We made a big deal out of the fact that both the fraternity and the school covered up the incident for 2 weeks. No one knew anything about it. The fraternity, head of the fraternity, who was a friend of Andrew's, said, this wasn't a campus issue, it wasn't a racial issue, we didn't think, and so we just kept it quiet. And Andrew Breitbart himself never went public, didn't talk to security, even though he claims now that the black kid against whom the cross burning was, for whom that was intended, was actually a friend of his who he tried to get into the fraternity. He says he was the guy who was pushing for this young man to be in the fraternity. It seems, and maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. What I know is, in the wake of this happening, Andrew Breitbart did not quit the fraternity in protest of their cover-up, which the head of security at Tulane at the time said they had engaged in and that it hampered the investigation. He didn't quit the fraternity. He made no public statement. He didn't come to the press conference to offer his support for his quote-unquote friend or the larger black community at Tulane. And I think that says a lot about this guy's character and his feelings around this issue. He had a chance to come forward, not only to make a statement about broader social truth, but to defend this guy who he says was a friend, and he didn't do it. And he stayed in that fraternity very happily for the rest of his college career, because I guess going out to the bars in New Orleans and getting drunk was perhaps more important to him than standing in solidarity with his friend. I think that tells you really sort of all you need to know about this guy.
Well, he's certainly blowing the lid off of how conservative civil rights are being encroached upon in Hollywood. I think you got to give him credit for that.
Yeah,
and I will say this, that in terms of a lawsuit, I think it is the the publication of the broadcast of that information by the broadcaster, in this case me, and so I signed me up as a co-defendant.
Yeah, you can't sue for libel when it's documented, and I've got the story in the Tulane newspaper where the head of security accuses the frat of the cover-up. So there's no basis for a lawsuit. But yes, you'd be free to join me if it happens. Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate the story. You're indulging us for that little piece of history.